Stephen A goes on The View and he just can't stop grifting. Hello, good people. It is Todd Shannon, data scientist, social commentator, getter of buckets. And I don't know how I missed this, but shortly after the presidential election was completed in the absolute romp of the MAGA coalition, the Common Sense Coalition, shout out to the MAGA Common Sense Coalition, Stephen A. Smith went on to The View to grift. Let me just explain something to you. I've been on this Stephen A. Smith thing, who I affectionately call, or maybe non-affectionately call, Stephen A. Grift, because Stephen A. has become a politician. And let me explain to you why I have been saying that for the last, say, year or so. Stephen A. works for a Disney company in ESPN that is effectively a cesspool of wokeness. It's a cesspool of ideological leftism. And in order to rise to the top of the ranks at a company like ESPN, you have to toe the line, right? You have to basically toe the party line, and you have to pay homage to the gods of wokeness, okay? You just can't rise to the ranks of the top guy at that organization any other way, in my opinion. And if you listen to Stephen A.'s kind of older commentary back before ESPN became overtly political, Stephen A. Smith was kind of based. You could hear on any given day Stephen A. Smith saying things that might be right in line with some of the things you might see a kind of a centrist or maybe even a conservative say today. And now Stephen A. Smith won't hardly fix his mouth, as it were, right? As we like to say, he won't fix his mouth to say stuff like that anymore. Or if he does, it's always what one hand gives, the other hand takes away, where he comes back and, he makes obeisance to the gods of wokeness. And he does this on The View. And I'd like to take a look at it because I thought it was pretty pathetic. And let's just get into it. There's a number of things that are problematic with this conversation. So let's let Stephen A. say it in his own words.
And then Kamala Harris is inserted. I don't blame her one bit.
Same.
I thought she did a phenomenal job.
Yep.
She went all out. She did what she could.
Yep.
But you can't overcome that kind of situation. And remember, there's two C words that are incredibly important in America. Capitalism is one. Competition is another, because it's a metaphor for capitalism in a lot of people's eyes. Because you were inserted, even though you were the vice president and it was the Biden-Harris administration, you had folks who are independent. I'm not talking about those on the right, and I'm not talking about those on the left, just independents, who said, wait a minute, she didn't experience a primary either. And the last time we saw her in a primary was 4 years ago, and she didn't even make it to Iowa. They used that as an excuse to point to her level of inexperience.
All right, so here's Stephen A. Right away you see why I have a problem with Stephen A. Because first of all, Stephen A. is making the case that Kamala Harris did a phenomenal job. Hang on a second. Stephen A. Smith might as well put on his clown shoes and a big red nose, because this is my problem, okay? He knows that that's not true. Kamala Harris did a phenomenal job. Just imagine Stephen A. Smith giving this sort of commentary, talking about a professional athlete, like let's take somebody like Giannis Antetokounmpo, all right? Let's say Giannis was, every time he has to play Nikola Jokic, he's, on rest, right? On rest, or taking a break. Or every time he goes to play Joel Embiid or some other top-tier big man in the NBA, he's ducking that smoke. Stephen A. Smith knows that he wouldn't say, based on what he's doing against the cupcakes, based on what he's doing against the guys who are not all-star level or all-pro level performers, he's killing it, so therefore he's doing a phenomenal job. All Kamala Harris did early in her campaign was duck smoke. And Stephen A would never give, because I've watched a lot of Stephen A. Smith, unfortunately, in my life. Stephen A. Smith would never, ever, it doesn't matter who it is, by the way. It could be LeBron. It could be, like I said, it could be Giannis. It could be Kevin Durant. Stephen A. Smith is on the record saying that Kevin Durant did the weakest superstar move in the history of superstars in the NBA because he went to go play with the Golden State Warriors when they had already won, 73 games the previous year. So he took his talents to an already loaded team. And Stephen A. talked about how weak that was. And he's talking about how Kamala Harris did a phenomenal job when all she did was duck smoke. All she did was give lame answers and hand waving and excuse making for the reasons why she didn't, for example, secure the border as the border czar. She did a phenomenal job. Stephen A. knows this is a lie, but he's on hostile territory, and he knows that if he says anything sideways about Kamala Harris, not only will they tear him to shreds, but he will never be invited back. And because Stephen A. Smith right now has what I believe to be a politician's mentality, where he's just saying what people want to hear based on where he is, he would never say such a thing. So, strike number one for Stephen A. Talking about Kamala doing a phenomenal job. He knows that that's not true. But let's go to another little clip here, because Stephen A. Smith, the grift keeps on, the grift that keeps on grifting, as I call Stephen A. Let's look at what he says here in this next clip.
So you think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No,
at this point?
I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal. Mm-hmm. I'm fiscal with my dollar.
First of all, that little phrase that he says, I'm a fiscal conservative and social liberal. It's the way Stephen A. tries to split the baby of common sense. Okay, but you're going to see here how he stretches the boundaries of so-called common sense when he can't make a solid case for why biological men shouldn't participate in women's sports.
I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that. These
That's
are
less than 1% of the population.
I understand that,
but you know what?
That's ridiculous.
But see, I think that's where the mistake is made.
Yeah,
you're saying it's ridiculous. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But most of the...
Okay. Ridiculous? It's ridiculous. First of all, I realize something, because if you have been following my channel for, say, more than 6 months, maybe 6 months to a year, then you've known that one of the other themes, besides Stephen A.'s grift, that I have covered on several occasions, is why the left loves so-called black women or women of color. And I've always kind of had like people like Joy Reid at the top of the absolute most obnoxious and absurd and toxic sort of black females who are basically just propaganda mouthpieces for the left. And I've explained why they love black women, because black women are supposed to be kind of at the top of the oppression hierarchy, so that anytime you disagree with them, you're effectively a racist and a misogynist. And don't be a gay black woman, because then you're sexist and a racist and a homophobe. But that's the reason why they love to use these women, because whenever they say things that are absurd, people, particularly men, are reticent to basically call out the nonsense for what it is. And so, I always talk about people like Jamel Hill and Joy Reid and Teslin Figaro, who have also covered on this channel. But Sunny Holston has flied under the radar. Sunny Holston might be the GOAT of absurd and ridiculous takes. This woman does not, I don't think she's ever made a coherent point in her entire life. Why is it ridiculous, Sunny Holston, that biological men should not compete with women? And I just want to say here, how absurd is it that we try to make the case that, oh, well, it's a, well, it's only 1% of the population. You know how many, you know what percentage of the population are elite athletes? It's even less than that. Okay? It only takes a handful of men participating in women's sports to ruin the whole thing, to ruin the whole competitive landscape. This is an absurd take. And when Stephen A says, when she says it's ridiculous, and he says, well, I don't disagree with you. This again, Stephen A. Smith covers sports for a living. He knows that women can't compete with men. He knows that. So why is it ridiculous to say, if you got meat and tubage, if you got junk in between your legs, you shouldn't be competing with women? What's so ridiculous about that? There again, he knows that he can't push back in this context because if he does, they will rip him to shreds and then he can't be invited back. And what Stephen A. wants more than anything is fame and money. I really believe that. But let's let him continue this ridiculous rant.
The voters out there don't think like that.
But
that
means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information. If you're out there busting your tail to make ends meet and to pay your bills and you're going to work every day and you got a family to take care of and you're in New York City, you're getting stuck 2 hours of your day, you're stuck in traffic, you understand, you got a whole bunch of stuff to go through. You don't have time to know what you and I know.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
Well, again,
maybe
I agree
not
with that.
be uninformed.
So let's just get this straight here. People, in order to know that girls shouldn't be subject to being pummeled by men in their respective sports, they have to listen to the news in order to not know that. Hang on a second, let me just bring you in close here, because this is the sort of thing that really, really ticks me off, okay? These people are so self-deluded, first of all, about their own influence. This is one thing that they haven't seemed to understand. This last election has shown that these people's influence is irrelevant. The celebrity, the propagandist on the news channels of the mainstream liberal media, stations like The View. Yes, there is a whole contingent of women with diseased thinking that these women could say anything, and these women who they influence would buy it. It doesn't matter. But for what I call the common sense coalition, people have demonstrated that they're not buying it. So you're not going to stand here and tell people who watch your show or whatever, they're not going to get, quote, educated out of believing, wait a second, a dude shouldn't be competing with a woman in competitive athletic sports. It's just not right. And when Stephen A. says, well, a lot of people don't agree with you, you notice he won't say why, because he knows that common sense notion is those arguments are very powerful, but he won't offer the actual reasons. He's just trying to present it like, oh, well, the people got better things to do than to thinking about these lesser issues. It's not a lesser issue, and the people are informed about it, and what they have said is that we reject this propaganda, we reject this ideology, and a resounding mandate has been given to Donald Trump and the rest of the Common Sense Coalition to get rid of this garbage. So anyway, let's just go back briefly to this final little take, because Stephen A., this is where it starts to take the cake, where he goes into white supremacy.
Howard Stern says that he wasn't confident that the country was ready to elect the first female president because he knows, quote, how men talk behind closed doors about us. So we're very privileged to have a great guy here today.
Yeah.
What do men say about us behind closed doors?
Well, first of all,
Say it to our faces.
Do tell.
I don't hide, so no worries there. Here's the deal. I respectfully disagree with Howard Stern, only from the standpoint that I wish he had been more specific. Why don't you say white men? Because let me tell you something about black men. We love our mamas.
Really, Stephen A? Hang on, let me find my button here.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Stephen A, what the heck are you talking about? Okay, first of all, whatever Stephen A thought he was doing there, by basically trying to throw white dudes under the bus or whatever, like black dudes are better. All right, we don't. I'm not even going to entertain that because there's too much to unpack there. But this is where Stephen A starts to lean into. This is red meat because he knows where he is. He knows that the brain dead people in this audience and on that panel are going to eat this up. I'm just going to let him continue here.
I know that.
We love, and we revere black women. And when we're trifling, we know it's us. It's not them.
Right, yeah.
You
I
understand?
understand.
So when he's
Really, that's why black men got all them baby mamas. Is that why black men are much less likely to marry the women that they impregnate? Right. So here's the thing. Stephen A, he thought he was throwing a knockout punch, or he thought he was, basically making himself look good by making this ridiculous point. But when we start talking about the facts, when we talk about the rubber meets the road, how do you honor women? The best way you can honor a woman, it's not about how you treat your mama, because if you treat your mama so good and you treat the woman that you are sleeping with like dirt, or you don't honor her by making her, as we used to call it, an honest woman, by marrying her and by taking care of your responsibilities to not just taking care of the kid, but taking care of your kid and the woman, right? Because that's a man's responsibility if you get a woman pregnant. What is he talking about? Like, what is Stephen A really talking about here? He doesn't want to get into the data on that. And I'm not saying that to say that black men are worse or anything like that. But what Stephen A tried to do was this is what leftists do, and this is what grifters like Stephen A do. He tried to drive a wedge racially instead of dealing with the categorical issue of men and women. And first of all, the idea that somebody like Howard Stern, a pervert, a career pervert, the idea that he knows how men talk about women behind closed doors. No, you know how you and the perverts talk about women behind closed doors, because the men that I roll with, we don't talk about women that way. But Stephen A had to take it another place because that's what you do when you're grifting.
He's saying that, okay, well, then let's talk about white men. We have a white power structure that still exists in this country today. I understand the white populace in this country was over 85% at one time. It's now dipped to about 57.4%.
Yep.
The white power structure is still in place. So when we talk about misogyny, when we talk about chauvinism, when we talk about women not necessarily being empowered, well, who's in a position of power to surrender some of that power? It's white men. So I think that when Howard Stern was talking, I can't speak to what white men are thinking. I can tell you this much. Black men, we revere women.
Yeah.
We don't have any problem looking at a woman as a leader.
And there you have it. I might have to make as an addendum to my title of Stephen A. Grift, Stephen A. Simp. Okay, because this is some simp nonsense. Sometime in the future, I might do a video where I talk about the real challenges of women in so-called leadership, and that a healthy society would never allow there to be so-called 50-50 leadership amongst men and women at the highest levels of society. A healthy society will always have a lopsided male leadership. In other words, it would be generally patriarchal in its orientation. And there's a very, very specific reason for that. Most of it is biology. And I'll talk about that later. It has nothing to do with women's capabilities or intelligence. It has more so to do with purpose and role. And someone like Stephen A. Smith would never make that sort of argument because it doesn't win him points with the woke coalition. But I wanted to point that out Stephen A. and those of his ilk, Stephen A. can be sometimes he can have some cogent analysis, and then other times you can see that he's clearly pandering to a certain audience. I think Stephen A. is hungry for money and power, and I think it's unfortunate because I think he's otherwise an intelligent person who might have something to offer to this general conversation. But let me know what you think, right? Am I being too hard on Stephen A. Smith? Or do you think I'm wrong for calling him Stephen A. Grift? And I'd just like to know what you think in the comments. If this is your first time seeing my channel, I appreciate you coming through and watching, and I appreciate all your support. Till next time, friends, God bless you.